This is the Garage Gym Athlete Podcast, and we're here to build autonomous athletes and put phenomenal programming into every garage, basement, and spare bedroom out there. I'm Jerred Moon, and I'm with Joe Courtney. We are strength and conditioning coaches who have turned over 20,000 people into garage gym athletes over the last decade. And we're here to reduce the information overload that exists in the health and fitness industry today. We're going to do that by covering relevant science and give actionable takeaways, not only from the data, but from our years of experience. So let's dive in. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Garage Gym Athlete Podcast. Jerred Moon here with Joe Courtney. And today we'll be talking about a lot of different things. Zone 2, we've been talking about Zone 2 for years, and it's actually gained a ton of popularity too. But we're going to be talking a little bit more about Zone 2. We had some questions pop up in the community. And I kind of want to talk about some theoretical stuff, my thoughts on Zone 2 that aren't necessarily based in science, but just my general belief and my ideas on programming. So we're going to get into that stuff today. If you stick around for the entirety of the episode, before we do, I just want to check in, see how you're doing, Joe. How's training? How's life? I heard you quit fitness and all you do is golf now. Is that
pretty much? I mean, I walk. It's just walking and getting sunshine and swinging a club, and my heart rate gets up because
anything else.
Yeah, my heart rate still gets up because I get really, really frustrated because I suck at golf. So it's like, there's still ups and downs.
Yeah, that's golf, man. I've never been able to get into it that much. Have played several times, but yeah. And also, we're kidding. Joe still works out from what I see. What I saw this morning on the old Instagram was that heart rate up in the 170s.
That's a lot of red.
What was that about?
I haven't had that red for a long time.
I was about to say, I didn't know you could get your heart rate that high. So
yeah, I think, Garmin keeps changing up my zones. It seems like every time I do like a higher intensity run. However, it's still like 170. I've hit that this week, and I think I hit it last week. Sometimes those longer intervals, I've been able to hit those a bit more. But my red starts, at least on Garmin, at like 162. So it's not all that high because my max heart rate's not as high as some others would be because my heart is just a lot lower. Yeah, I was doing the 5-minute intervals from hard to kill, so I was really pushing on those. But even so, like on the third one, I was hitting that zone 4 according to Garmin, and I still felt pretty decent. Like I still kept that pace for that one, and then the next couple intervals, I was in that almost the entire time. So it did some threshold adjustment after the workout. I don't know what that's going to amount to.
I kind of just doing that, man. Like I think there's been some sort of update with Garmin, and it's kind of frustrating me because I've noticed that my zones have changed without me. Like when it asks at the end, it's like, do you want to adjust your max heart rate? I'm like, no, don't touch anything. Like I have these exactly where I'm at, but it adjusted it anyway. So now it brought my zone 2 down lower. And then I went in and I feel like I can't manually adjust it how I used to be able to. Like it really wants you to base it off of a percent or whatever. You can't just say, these are my zone 2 numbers, because we did that like blood testing to find out zone 2. So I'm a little bit frustrated with it. So I haven't dove into it that much. I really feel like it's the last like week I noticed that they changed this. And so, and I just realized I could not easily change it back. I'm sure I'll figure out how to eventually.
Yeah, I've kind of ignored it because I know when I do zone 2, I'm going to get up into the green color because that's the 140s ish to me, the mid to high 140s. So I was like, okay, whatever, that's fine. I'll just stay in those. And if I get into yellow, then I know I need to back off because I know I'm in the 150s at that point. But speaking of like a new update, something that happened today when I went for my run, never happened. So I've had Garmin for 5 or 6 years now, 2 different ones. And today on my run, for some reason, it started talking to me. So like normally, I did like a quick structured intervals on my watch, which I've done a ton of times. Whenever I do my quarter mile repeats, I do it to those or anything that's like just the same repeat. So I did that for my 5-minute intervals today, and I started, and it said, okay, starting warm up, blah, 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 whatever. And then I finished my warm up and said, okay, warm up done, time this, now run for 5 minutes. And it did this. So every interval, it would say like what I just did and what I'm about to do. Never done that before. I don't know how the voice command got turned on. I don't mind it right now so much, but I feel like
I've been doing that for a while.
Really?
But I mean, so I have the Epix Pro. I think with the Epix Pro, it came with that feature. Maybe, and because I was running intervals this week too from hard to kill track, and yeah, it's like it's the off and on intervals, and it would be like rest, whatever, blah blah blah, and then it's like run, recovery complete, all these kind of things, and so I kind of like it. It's annoying for shorter intervals
Yeah,
because
that's what I was gonna say.
it can take the voice like 10 seconds to say everything, and it's only if it's like a 30-second interval, you're like, I'm about done with this damn thing. You're just talking. It's talking
Yeah,
the whole time. It's telling you it's about over. It's telling you it's over. It's telling you to
yeah.
begin. So yeah, it's kind of funny with shorter intervals.
It must be that because usually what happens. So I think your Epix Pro is a generation newer than mine. I just have the regular 7, not the 7 Pro. And then usually when a new generation comes out, they'll have a big software update, and then they slowly roll those out to the older generation so that they catch up for whatever things that they can do. So I think I just updated it last week, or I might have remembered an update. So I think that's probably it. But it was just interesting. I don't know how I would turn it off, but I'm fine with it for now.
Yeah, it's a cool feature. But so training's good. Otherwise, you're good to go.
Yep, about to travel again, but I've been really. I started doing the Murph burner this week. I really wanted to start. I feel like I've been neglecting my legs some, like a little bit of. I just want that like strength endurance sort of burn, almost hypertrophy. So my legs have been pretty sore this week, but that was kind of the name of the game with Murph burner, and then I did the running intervals today. So sort of a mashup hybrid of what between two things. But
Yeah,
good week.
between two ferns, right there. That's what you're doing.
That's what it is.
For me, training's been good. I don't have a lot to update. Been doing the hard to kill track. I do travel next week, so I'll be figuring out what to do on that week of travel. But just a funny story. Speaking of intervals, I kind of restarted on the intervals at the beginning of the hard to kill track this past week, just because they were getting so out of whack. I think I kind of talked about that last time. I wanted to just kind of start fresh, and so that was the 30-second interval, 30 intervals of 30-30. So 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off with a warm up and a cool down. And what was really funny is where I run now is I have like this back country road that like I barely see a car, I rarely see a human, and I love it. It's just a great road to run on because it's relatively safe, like not a lot going on out there. But there are these two roads that lead to this road. There's like one that way, one this way, and it's kind of like a T intersection. And then you can take a right or left on this road, and you can run for a long time. And what was super awkward is it takes me about my warm up, like a 10-minute run to get to the road, and then I can run on this road. This woman who's a runner and myself both get on the road and go the same direction at the same time. So she comes from the other side of the T intersection. I come, and she takes a left, I take a right. Then we're basically like running together. And I was like, seriously? Like, have you seen White Castle?
Yeah. Wait,
Or Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle?
I was
Whatever.
like, I have seen a White Castle, and I have seen the
Yeah.
movie Kumar Go to
Yeah.
White
Well,
Castle.
like when he's like, he goes to like pee in the forest, and like a random guy shows up next to him. He's like what the hell? Like there's anywhere. he's like,
Yeah.
what? This is your bush? Anyway, it's a really funny scene. That's how I felt. I was like, seriously? Like you could have ran the other direction. I guess I could have ran the other direction, but now we're running together. But what was really funny
On the
was
same side of the road or opposite sides of the road?
same side. Is almost like we're running together. She seemed like she was a very good runner too. It wasn't like she seemed very. I think maybe she wanted the competition. But I'm about to run intervals. I have like 1 minute left in my like zone 2 warm up before I'm running intervals. But I do get a decent amount ahead of her. And then I immediately go to like she's like right behind me, but my first interval is fast, right? It's like a 30-second sprint. And so she's right behind me, like we're almost running together. But then I just take off. Like I just take off for 30 seconds fast, talking like 30-minute mile pace. And then I stop and I start walking. And so this is how it goes for the next half hour. She would basically catch up to me, and then I would run really fast. And then she would basically catch up to me. Then I'd run really fast. I mean, I think she got that I was doing intervals and I wasn't screwing with her. But like that was what happened. She never caught me while I was walking because I'd run so fast in the 30 seconds, but she would almost catch up to me and then I'd sprint again. It was almost like I was a child who's like playing a game, who's like, you can't catch me, you can't catch me. But it just
Don't get
worked
out of
out
my
that way.
sight.
Yeah, it was just so hilarious and so awkward. But I'm hoping that doesn't happen again. That was my training story of the week.
Dude, I've had that experience so many times because I always try and run on the roads, and usually, I mean, you're a lot less populated than I am, so there's other runners around in wherever we've ran before. But there's so many times where I am running intervals, and I catch up to somebody, and then they pass me, and then I have to run past them like really really fast, and then I stop, and then they pass me, and it's like I don't want them
Yeah,
to
it's
think
almost
like
like you
I'm
don't
just
know
trying
what
to
you're
like.
doing. Like, it's because if you were just like going on ego and competition and you're like, I've done this on a bike before. I used to do this when I'd ride my bike. Like, I'd be on the road and I'd see somebody else biking and I'd be like, screw the training program. I'm passing this person and then I will stay ahead of them. Like, I've done that, but I'm not doing that on these runs. I'm just like trying to run what's programmed. And it ends up being really funny. But
Yeah, there are times where I'm like, I'm just going to go a little bit farther, a little bit extra, or a random turn because I just kind of want to stop this back and
well,
forth.
yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I probably ran a little bit faster on my 30 seconds on because I didn't want her to catch me. So she probably pushed me to some degree.
and
Um,
and you also stare really hard at your watch, like for at least twice as much as you would normally, because you're like you want them to know that you're paying attention to your watch and you are doing an
yeah,
actual interval. You're not just messing around.
she had to have figured it out by interval 17 or whatever for sure.
So,
Um, okay, let's talk about zone two. We had a question in the community. That's what I want to start with. Let me just pull it up real quick. So this was from Jeffrey Smith, and he was talking about zone two apparatus differences. And he said, there's been a lot of zone two talk in the fitness world the last few years. I heard something the other day that struck me. It was when training for, say, a marathon, zone two work on a bike isn't the same as running. Does that make sense? To me, it seems zone two is zone two no matter the apparatus. Running zone two may help for the marathon aspect, i.e., being on your feet for that long. But I assume zone two work on a rower or bike or running or swimming or whatever has the same general benefits regardless. Am I wrong? So that's a great question. I can kind of jump into some of the science of this, or I would say the more physiological aspects. Did you have anything that you want to say on this specific one, or do you want me to take it from the top?
yeah, I'll just say like just um, that he was mostly referring to specifically the cardio benefits. Obviously, if you need to get better at a marathon, you're going to run. If you need to get
Right.
better at a specific thing, you're going to do that. With the 92-year-old man world record holder, he rode at zone two for most of his training. He actually rode. He didn't do something else for his zone two. So if you actually are training for something, want to get better at something, then do that. But for overall, we can get more into. I'll let you go.
Yeah. And 100% that's true. If you're training for something specific, don't rely or expect any crossover between different cardiovascular monostructural activities. Like if you need to run a marathon, you run. If you need to do a cycling race, you cycle. You don't supplement. Like if you did need to supplement, it'd be because you're injured and you can't handle the volume. Like I did that some training for the ultra marathon. I had some like injuries flare up, but I wanted to keep my lungs in the cardiovascular side of things right. So I would hop on the ski erg, I'd hop on the bike, but just like the minimal effective dose that I need to try and stay in shape. But I do think Jeffrey here is talking more about the other benefits of zone two, which is just widening that aerobic base and being healthy and longevity and all those things that are associated with zone two. So here's the difference that I want to point out first. And when we did the zone two episode, we kind of got into the weeds about finding our zone two by testing our blood. And the short of that, you can go listen to that episode if you want to. But ultimately, what you're trying to do is keep your blood lactate below 2 millimole, and that is the the indicator, the marker that you're in zone two proper. Not necessarily just a heart rate. These heart rates do correlate, but obviously, what we found, and I kind of mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, was that I could go a little bit harder. I think we all found that. Like My proper zone 2, just if we went off the percentages based off my max heart rate, it would say my upper limit zone 2 is like 148, 149. But what we found when we tested blood lactate with running, it was more like I think I could get to like 154, 155 or something like that and still be zone 2. So it's not like this massive difference, but it's my blood lactate wasn't surpassing this other level. Now, what you have to know about blood lactate is it is a byproduct of basically your muscles being used. And so my takeaway here of how this could apply to different modalities is if you do zone 2 on an airdyne, we have leg involvement, we have arm involvement. If you have it on a rower, same thing, it's full body. Bike, it's predominantly legs, right? And I think all of these other apparatuses are different than running. I feel like running, while your muscles are pounding the pavement, there's not as much muscle involvement as say like rowing or bike. Your legs are just used so much more. So what what I would assume happens, and what I have not tested blood lactate on different modalities, but I know athletes who have confirmed this. Like your blood lactate will be different on a bike. Also, if you haven't trained that much on a bike, then it would be running. So it kind of depends on what your body's become more efficient at. But it's also dependent on how much muscular involvement is being used. So again, if we're rowing, we're using our arms, we're using our back, we're using our legs, we're using a little bit of everything. My blood lactate might be higher at a lower heart rate. And so that does change my zone 2 a little bit. So that was one thing I wanted to hit on. I don't know how massive these differences would be, but ultimately it's going to be a little bit different, depending on the apparatus and depending on how much the muscles are involved. But
I think whenever we get a chance again, we got to do the break out the lactate meter again and try it on bikes.
I mean, I want to try it in so many different ways. And that's one of the things I do want to talk about. But to his point of like zone 2 is zone 2, does it really matter? I don't think it matters that much. And that's my like the honest truth I have. Because think about it. We went through all this like testing and, I was playing with this blood lactate meter, trying to get it right, like did an hour's worth of a test to figure it out. I mean, it's not that big of a deal, but it's a lot of hoops to jump through. And ultimately, what did I find? It's like a 5 or 6 beat per minute difference than like what my Garmin just estimated. It's not that crazy, right? And so I have a feeling that that's going to be the case for almost any of these things. So I do agree with his like overall ideas, like zone 2 is zone 2, right? Yeah, I think it is. I think as long as you're not trying to get the upper limit threshold of zone 2, and because that's the only real reason you'd want to test is like you wouldn't want to be sandbagging it. Like that's the reason I tested, because I was training for an ultra marathon and I kind of wanted to toe that upper end of zone 2 so I could hold faster paces but still be in zone 2. But if you're just training for life in general, I don't think it matters that much. Just don't try to be at that upper limit threshold to where your blood lactate probably is spilling over. And just like an indicator of this, without having to do any blood lactate tests, if you are say like, hey, I'm going to hop on the rower and I'm going to hop on the bike and I'm going to do zone 2. If your legs are burning is an indicator of lactate production. And so you're probably starting to spill over. That blood lactate is probably starting to spill over past 2 millimole. Again, that's not scientific. That's just like, if we're going by feel, if you're feeling some burning in the legs, you probably need to take it back because you're producing a little bit too much blood lactate. Zone 2 needs to be that conversational pace, not overly muscle burn related. And so anyway, I think if you're just trying to get zone 2 benefits, boom, that's it. Like stay in that zone 2 heart rate. It doesn't really matter, where you're at. So yes, zone 2 can be different per apparatus, but I think that you're not you, Jeffrey, but like I think all these people who are like big proponents of this, like Peter Attia and everything. I mean, Peter Attia is like maniacal about this stuff, like almost to like an annoying degree that's like overkill. I've listened to some of his zone 2 stuff, like, and I think that's one of his like traits that makes him a phenomenal doctor is like his attention to detail and all this other stuff. But like how far he goes into the weeds with some of this other crap, I'm like, I think you're taking it too far. Like in all honesty, it does not matter. Like you're not going to get 18 years of extra life because you were at the perfect millimole of lactate. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's not going to matter. Like, it's really not going to matter. Like, if you're doing a lot of exercise, you're widening that aerobic base, you're getting the longevity benefits. It's not going to be that big of a deal if you're at like, I was at 147 instead of 152 for this heart. Like, you're going to be fine. You're going to get all the benefits. So I think you can rest easy in that, knowing you're going to be fine.
Yeah, and most of the studies that we've ever seen of, going back to the 92-year-old rower or all these other ones, no matter what the apparatus was, the training volume, it was still like 70% of the training was zone 2. So that proportion still stayed the same no matter what sort of training people have done for whatever benefits they're going for. So just if you just still keep that applied, as long as you're not, training for something specific.
I think that should be everyone's biggest takeaway with zone 2 is just that it needs to be in your training and it needs to be a majority, right? Like, that's it. Like, it does. I don't think we need to get much further in the weeds on the exact heart rate or blood lactate or anything. It's just, I think what's happened in the past is people go too hard too often, and they're wondering why they're not seeing results, specifically in running. Like, if you don't really know what you're doing running, it's like you go for a 5-mile run because that sounds good, right? And your heart rate's at zone 4 the whole time, and then you're wondering why you're not seeing any progress, right? This is where zone 2 becomes helpful for people who don't really know what they're doing. But if you're doing a couple zone 2 runs per week and a couple interval runs and you're trying to get better at running, you'll get better just doing those things. And so I think that's what people need to know. And that's biggest takeaway for people. I'd want for people is just like, know that it needs to be in your training to improve your VO2 max and everything else. Another, we just kind of want to hit on some other topics. One was zone 2 in the heat, which I feel like I've talked about, but like, what do you do when it gets hot? Because it gets really hot here in Texas, and that, if I'm running outside, that changes my zone 2 significantly. Like, in all honesty, it can make me walk at a very slow pace if I go outside in the middle of the day when it's 114. Like, my heart rate might just be in zone 2, chilling outside. So, what's your take? What do you do, Joe, when it gets hot and try and stay in zone 2? Do you pay attention to it, or you just kind of do your own thing?
I still pay attention to it. I remember in Bahrain, my threshold there, I think, was 110, and I stopped running outside when it was that phase of the summer. So, and I was sticking to my zones, and that's when I did start walking. It was like an aggressive 2 or 3 weeks, and my pacing went at least a minute or more slower. So if I had to walk, I had to walk because I wanted to stay within that threshold. So I still stick to my zones, even if I could do more.
Yeah, I mean, big thing for me, I just found it really annoying. So I just wouldn't run in the middle of the day if it's the middle of summer. I do try and do early morning runs if I'm running. That way it's still a factor because it's still warm here, even first thing in the morning. But you can play with it a little bit more. But one thing I always like for people to know, and this is like a big takeaway I had doing Murph every week for multiple years, is like I'd always do it outside. I'd always do it when it was really hot. And my times would always start to suck in the summer. And it was something I was really paying attention to, right? Like Murph times. I'm trying to get them better. And if, let's just say I started Murph in January, it would be like this bell curve on time. So it's like, oh, they're pretty decent times. And then the times go up in the summer and then they come back down in the winter. And it's just because of the heat. But what's crazy is it's not like a true bell curve. It's more like straight line, and then it shoots up to the curve, but then the times drop significantly post summer. So you're still getting a lot of benefit training in the heat, maybe even beyond, what the zone 2 would be. And so once it cools off, you'll realize, hey, you were still building a lot of capacity. You just didn't realize it because of the heat. And then once it cools down, your times will dramatically decrease in running or whatever you're trying to improve at. So ultimate takeaway for what do you do in the heat? Try and run when it's not like blazing hot outside in the summer, and pay attention to it to some degree. But I do think that you should try and stick within your zones, kind of like you're talking about, Joe, to the best of your ability.
Yep.
Now, the two other things I want to hit on was kind of going back to Jeffrey's question is like, zone 2 is zone 2, doesn't matter. This is what I want to find out. So if you've been following the Hard to Kill track, we've been doing 42-minute EMOMs. And so it's a minute, a minute. So 4 minutes of basically doing something. Then you rest, right? The remainder, how an EMOM works. But then we have 2 minutes of rest. Minute 5 and 6 are rest. And so you're doing 7 rounds of these things. And the goal during these 42-minute EMOMs is to stay in zone 2 or as close to zone 2 as possible. And what I want to know is what we're doing. Okay, so like I just did one of these today, so it's like fresh on my mind. So what I do is like I play around with the reps a lot, and I talked about this on one of the podcasts, just making sure people are able to do the 42-minute EMOMs. But like I might start with way more reps than is actually prescribed in the first set because I'm trying to get to zone 2 pretty fast. And then what might happen during minute 5 and 6, which are technically rest minutes, I might be walking or even jogging, depending on where my heart rate is. Like this morning, my heart rate was not getting into zone 2. It was either a heart rate monitor thing or it was just like, morning, my body wasn't waking up or whatever. But like I did the first round all the way through and I was in the rest periods and my heart rate was at like 98. And I was like, no, like we gotta get going. So the next round, I really kicked it up. I like doubled the reps on everything. I ran way faster. One of the EMOM things was like to run 100, 200 meters. So I ran really hard during that time frame. And then it got into zone 2. And then what I was doing minute 5 and 6 almost every single time was either a very light jog or a fast walk to keep my heart rate in zone 2. So after round 1 or round 2 playing around with it, so like the rest of the like 36 minutes or something like that, I was in zone 2 that entire time. Like I didn't go above it, I didn't go below it. I stayed in zone 2 that entire time with doing work, doing a little bit of rest, doing more work, walking, jogging during the intervals. And so my question is the same as Jeffrey's, is like, is this okay? Am I getting all the same benefits of zone 2, even though I'm not, like, who wrote the rule for the human being that you have to benefit from aerobic base building? You have to run in a straight line. You have to bike in a straight line. You have to row. You have to, like, who said that that's the only way to benefit from zone 2? I think that's just the easiest way to get your heart rate at a spot and keep it there. That's it. That's all that really, it's just convenient. But I think if we can master these EMOMs, these zone 2 EMOMs, and we really figure out, and that's what I've been getting a lot better at, is like, how do I keep my heart rate within this zone? Because I'm not having huge fluctuations in these EMOMs either after I kind of get it dialed in. It's not like, oh, it goes down to 120 and then goes up to 150. Like I'm generally keeping it like 140, 145, like in that range for the full EMOM. And so my question is basically the same, that I don't fully know, but that's the next thing I want to test with a blood lactate meter, because that'll kind of be some of the proof there. And then just doing it for long periods of time. Like if I do 60-minute EMOMs, 45-minute EMOMs, and I just do those, that's my only form of zone 2 training. Will I get a lot fitter in the process? My theory is yes, because like there's no human handbook that you're issued that said, yeah, this is the only way to improve your aerobic base. You have to run in a straight line for 60 to 90 minutes to do it. So anyway, that's one thing that I'm really looking to find out over the next few years. And honestly, I want to really learn how that works, because the reason I want to do it, we've talked about blood sugar and everything else. Like I think there's a huge benefit to dumping your glycogen stores with these EMOM workouts. So like I'm doing all these things like that either involve a barbell or a kettlebell. They're lifting their muscular involvement. So I'm dumping all this glycogen, but I'm also staying in zone 2, which doesn't normally happen as much. Like that's what I found with running. When I'd run zone 2, it had very minimal effect on my blood sugar. But when I'm doing weight bearing stuff, load bearing stuff, it helps my blood sugar quite a bit stay regulated throughout the entire day. So that's something that I'm looking to find out and want to research a lot more.
Yeah, you're gonna have to really record like meticulously all of what you've done and data and stuff, because I you're saying before, the different exercise that you do might have an effect on what your blood lactate is, and so really honing that, or picking the best exercises, or how to, maybe it's not an EMOM, maybe you just do, get on the bike for a while and then get off, do some calisthenics and then get back on the bike and see if that can, something to that degree. I'm definitely interested in it a lot, because I think I had the pendulum swing of doing too much zone 2. And I also forget that, like, a lot of times with some of the lifting, some of the circuits, things that we do, is that we're in zone 2 a lot during normal workouts, not doing a single modality something. So, I've been getting into wanting to do much more faster intervals and more into the high intensity end, because I was lacking the upper end But my lower end of zone 2, I was getting plenty of because I would go on these weekly long zone 2 runs, and then I would have the regular training that I was probably in zone 2 a good bit for as well. So if we can combine, some of that lifting with zone 2, then that leaves more room for, okay, let's just go balls out to some of these other intervals as well.
Yeah, it's like zone 2. I don't know which example to go with. Maybe I'll just use both. Did you know a squirrel, like if you find their like den or whatever, they normally have like 2 or 3 years worth of food? Have you ever heard that? So like
No.
squirrels are just like high anxiety, looking for food all day, every day, squirreling it away, right? Like that's how we got that term. They're just hiding all the nuts that they find over and over again, all their food. But I think, and I don't know if this is a true fact, but what I've heard is that squirrels have, on average, like 2 to 3 years worth of food in their den. It's like you're gonna be fine. You know what I mean? And that's how I feel with zone 2. And I talked to Zach Bitter about this. It's like zone 2 is like collecting those nuts throughout the year over and over again. But if you never eat them, it's like an unnecessary, like you're what you're doing is unnecessary. And so how does that translate to what we're talking about? Well, it's like zone 2, you can do all this zone 2, but what it's doing is it's prepping the groundwork for the upper end training. If you never do the upper end training with enough intensity or enough volume or doing it consistently, the zone 2 training you're doing is kind of a waste. Not truly a waste. Like you're still exercising, you're still sweating, you're still getting a benefit, but it's like you're just building this massive base, but you're never going up on the pyramid. You're never getting the higher intensity. So you're not going to increase your VO2 max by only doing zone 2. But what you could do is like, say your VO2 max is 45 right now. And so then you do all this zone 2. And so what you've done is you've increased. Now you have a base with a potential VO2 max to go to 50. But you're going to have to do the harder training for that to happen. It's like I've done so much zone 2. I've increased my base enough to have a VO2 max of 50, but I haven't done enough top end training. You have to do the top end training to actually go from that 45 to 50. Like doing all the zone 2 just stretches your potential, your possibility from 45 to 50, but to actually get to the 50, you have to do the hard stuff. And so that's one of the things I've seen biggest issues overall with this popularity of zone 2. It has gotten so popular, and most people don't have near enough time to do what people are recommending on the internet. People are like, yeah, you need to be doing 4 hours of zone 2 a week. I'm like, you're not speaking to real humans. Like I've been working with people, athletes for over a decade now. Anyone saying you need at least 4 hours of zone 2 has never worked with an athlete. Like they're working with professional athletes if they're saying shit like that.
Casual athletes.
Yeah. Like it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. Like when they're saying you need 4 hours of zone 2, it's like, it's hard to get a human being to exercise 4 hours per week, period. Like period. And you're saying it all needs to be zone 2. And so people hear stuff like that who are regular exercisers. They think they need to be doing all this zone 2. And now they're like, they're doing 95% of their training in zone 2. And they're like, well, I don't actually have time for this other stuff, but I heard zone 2 is so good for you. It's like, it's only really good for you if you're able to do the other things too. So I don't think you also need as much. Like, I think that it's gotten a little bit, like we've gotten a little bit carried away with some of the zone 2. So don't do too much zone 2 either. Like know what you're trying to get better at. Like I think if you just did exercise 4 or 5 days a week for the rest of your life and didn't pay attention to anything else, you're going to be fine. Like, okay, like you'll be fine. But if you wanted to like really improve, like that's what I'm always trying to do. I actually want to see if I can improve my VO2 max. I want to get better at things. So I'm trying to do training that matters, training that leads me somewhere. But if that's not important to you, then just exercise consistently for the rest of your life and you're going to be fine.
We need to create like a weekly or monthly athlete like scratch pad, like check block, almost like how we program, of like, hey, this blocks, there's so many blocks of this, but have it be like, zone 2 and upper and like certain strength and like something speed or and whatnot, but it's and core, and like so that on a month scale you can see, okay, I did all this zone 2, but I didn't hit my upper end, my high intensity stuff, so I know I need to hit that. So like a 1 month scratch box.
Well, or you could just follow Garage Gym Athlete programming, where I've already thought of all of that for you, and I've tried to program the appropriate amounts of intensity, strength, core work, different planes of movement, zone 2. And that's really the balance that I'm trying to seek for everybody on the hard to kill track, is being able to, like, how can we balance all these things without going too far in any one direction, I think is ultimately what I'm trying to achieve with my programming. So we're getting close. I think that's about it for zone 2. So I think if anybody else has any questions about this stuff, just know there are ways to execute it. Don't go overboard with it. And pay attention to some basic things. If you do want to get into the blood lactate stuff, we do have an episode on that, and you could go to the episode where we talk about zone 2 blood lactate testing. We kind of talk about our pros
There's
and
a whole
cons.
video on it too.
Yeah, I think we have a YouTube episode as well where we actually show you our lessons learned with using a blood lactate meter for measuring zone 2, kind of what you want to pay attention to, all that kind of stuff. So if you're really interested in this stuff and kind of want to nerd out or geek out or find a very individualized zone 2 for you in a particular modality, go get it done. Go try it out with one of these blood lactate meters. We got the resources for you. Cool. Well, that's it for this one. For all of our athletes out there doing the training, really appreciate you guys. And for anyone who wants to be a part of Garage Gym Athlete, go to garagegymathlete.com, sign up for a free trial. We would love to have you, but that's it for this one. Remember, if you don't kill comfort, comfort will kill you.